The rain had been falling steadily since early evening, drumming against the windshield of Daniel's old sedan as he navigated the winding country road. The wipers worked overtime, smearing the water in a hypnotic rhythm, and the beam of his headlights barely pierced the curtain of rain ahead. The GPS signal had cut out nearly 30 minutes ago, leaving him dependent on fading road signs and his memory. Every so often, a flash of lightning illuminated the landscape, revealing skeletal trees swaying violently in the wind, their branches clawing at the black sky. The sense of isolation pressed heavily on him. No other cars, no houses, just endless road and the low growl of thunder. As the minutes passed, Daniel's unease grew. His phone's battery had slipped into the red, and the eerie quiet between the bursts of thunder only made him more aware of his own breathing. Then, out of the darkness, his headlights caught a figure standing on the shoulder of the road. A lone man, drenched from head to toe, wearing what looked like an old, tattered trench coat. He didn't move to flag Daniel down. He simply stood there, his head tilted slightly downward, as if he were listening to something deep beneath the sound of the rain. Instinct screamed at Daniel to keep driving, but the idea of leaving someone stranded in this weather gnawed at his conscience. He slowed the car to a cautious stop and rolled the window down just enough for his voice to carry over the roar of the storm. "You need a ride?" Daniel called, his words almost swallowed by the wind. The man lifted his head slightly, revealing pale skin, water streaming from his slick back hair, and eyes that seemed too dark to reflect the light. "Yes," the stranger said, his voice low but clear, as if unaffected by the wind or the rain. Without waiting for an invitation, he opened the passenger door and slid in, the smell of wet earth and something faintly metallic following him inside. The car suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. They drove in silence for several minutes, the rain hammering the roof like nails. Daniel tried to make small talk, asking where the man was headed, but his passenger only gave short, vague answers. "Just further down," he would say, pointing vaguely toward the darkness ahead. Each time lightning flashed, Daniel caught glimpses of the man's hands resting on his knees, unnaturally still, with long, pale fingers that didn't seem to twitch even once. The stranger didn't shiver, didn't adjust his coat, didn't do anything but stare ahead, unblinking, as though he were watching something Daniel couldn't see. It wasn't until Daniel glanced at the rearview mirror that the first real shock hit him. In the faint light of the dashboard, the man's reflection wasn't there. The empty passenger seat stared back at him in the mirror, even though the weight in the seat beside him was unmistakable. His heart lurched, and he gripped the steering wheel tighter. Lightning flashed again, blinding him for a split second, and when his vision cleared, the man had turned his head, not toward Daniel, but toward the back seat, as if listening for someone who wasn't there.
Aisha's eyes darted between the road ahead and the unwavering glow behind her. Every instinct screamed at her to keep moving, but the longer she drove, the more the highway felt like a loop. She swore she'd passed the same crooked oak twice, the one with a lightning-struck trunk and a blackened hollow at its base. The storm didn't let up, but the rain had started to change in sound. Instead of the rhythmic patter on the roof, there was now an intermittent tap-tap-tap, as if something harder than water was hitting the car. Her stomach twisted when she realized the sound wasn't random. It came in steady bursts, almost like knuckles rapping on glass. She leaned forward, scanning the edges of her windshield, but saw only rivulets of rainwater chasing each other toward the wipers. She thought about calling someone, but her phone still sat dead to the world. It wasn't just that there was no service, the screen had gone black altogether. Even when she pressed the power button, nothing happened. The headlights behind her drew closer. Not rushing, not aggressive, just gliding nearer like they had all the time in the world. Her grip on the wheel tightened until her wrists ached. She decided to test the driver, easing her foot onto the brake to slow down. Within seconds, the lights adjusted, matching her speed exactly. She tried again, this time accelerating sharply. They kept up effortlessly, no splashing of tires, no high beams, no flicker. A break in the fog revealed a green road sign ahead, its paint peeling and letters barely legible. She squinted through the rain. Hollow's Edge, 3 miles. She'd never heard of it, and something about the name made her pulse quicken. Her gut told her she shouldn't head there, but the alternative, stopping here, in the dark, with those lights behind her, felt worse. She pressed on, each mile stretching longer than the last. As she approached the supposed turnoff, lightning lit up the forest on her right, revealing what lay beyond the guardrail. A figure, pale, drenched, and impossibly still, stood among the trees. It faced the road, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, and in the split second before darkness swallowed it again, Aisha saw the most unsettling detail of all: 2 glowing, white circles where its eyes should be. The exact same glow as the headlights still trailing her car. The road narrowed further as Jason pushed deeper into Hollow Bend. The gravel hissed under his tires, the crunching sound swallowed by the rain. His wipers squealed across the glass, fighting the steady curtain of water. The GPS still spoke in its calm, mechanical tone, but the reception icon on the screen flickered in and out, like a heartbeat skipping. With each mile, the sense that he was driving into the wrong place pressed harder against him. Around the next bend, he saw something lying across the road, a dark shape, stretched from one side to the other. He slowed, his headlights sweeping over it. It was a tree branch, thick and slick with rain. Relief fluttered briefly in his chest. At least it wasn't an accident, or something worse. He eased the car forward, rolling the front tires over the limb, the suspension groaning softly, but as he passed, he noticed the ends of the branch were oddly clean. Not splintered from a storm. Cut freshly. The bark at the edges was pale, sap still beating in the rain. Jason's relief dissolved into a tight knot of unease. The branch hadn't fallen, it had been placed there. On purpose. Further ahead, the trees pulled back slightly, opening into a small clearing. The headlights revealed a weathered wooden sign nailed to a crooked post: "Welcome to Hollow Bend." The paint was faded to a ghostly gray, the letters rough-edged as if clawed at. Behind it, a single street lamp stood in the rain, its bulb faintly flickering. There were no houses in sight, no parked cars, no movement, just the lamp buzzing softly in the emptiness. Jason stopped the car. Through the curtain of rain on the windshield, something caught his eye. At the very edge of the light, just beyond where the clearing met the trees, a figure stood. Not moving. Not waving. Just watching. The rain streaked down his window, distorting the shape, but Jason could still make out the faint suggestion of shoulders, a head, and arms hanging unnaturally still at its sides. Aisha froze just inside the doorway, the warm, heavy air pressing against her skin like damp cloth. The chime over the door had stopped ringing, but the sound seemed to echo faintly in her ears, as though it were still happening somewhere deep in the building. She took a hesitant step forward, the soles of her shoes sticking slightly to the linoleum floor. The waitress at the counter didn't move, didn't even twitch. Aisha cleared her throat softly, the sound swallowed almost instantly by the room. "Excuse me," she tried, her voice low, tentative. No answer. The coffee mugs on the table steamed in unison, the wisps curling upward and vanishing before they reached the low ceiling. She realized with a shiver that she couldn't smell the coffee anymore. The burnt sugar scent had thickened, undercut by something sharper, coppery, raw. Slowly, she turned toward the corner where the pale figure sat. It was still hunched forward, hands folded neatly in its lap, the glow of its eyes bright enough to reflect off the chrome napkin holder on the table beside it. Aisha's instinct screamed to leave, but her feet didn't obey. Instead, she found herself drifting toward the counter, her hand brushing against one of the mugs as she passed. The handle was burning hot. She jerked back, startled, but the liquid inside hadn't rippled at all, no movement, no splash, as if it weren't liquid at all. The waitress lifted her head suddenly, hair parting to reveal eyes exactly like the figure's, 2 flawless circles of blinding white light. The rest of her face was blank, skin smooth as porcelain, mouth set in a line too still to be human. The pale figure in the corner stood. It didn't rise the way a person would, it simply went from sitting to standing in one impossible motion, as though a frame of reality had been skipped. Water pooled beneath its feet, even though the floor around it was perfectly dry. It began to move toward her, each step utterly silent, its glow dimming and brightening like the slow pulse of a dying star. Aisha backed toward the door, her hand searching desperately for the handle. She yanked it open and stumbled out into the rain, but the moment her feet hit the parking lot, the world beyond the cafe window looked different. The "open" sign was gone. The windows were dark. And the building behind her was no longer a cafe at all, it was a boarded-up ruin, its walls sagging, its sign so weathered the letters had rotted away. The smell of burnt sugar still clung to her clothes. The rain felt colder now, each drop stinging against her skin as she ran to her car. Her breath came in short bursts, steaming in the air, though the night wasn't cold enough for that. The cafe, or what had once been a cafe, loomed behind her, its windows like black, sightless eyes. She fumbled the car door open, slid inside, and locked it, her wet clothes clinging uncomfortably to her skin. The moment she turned the key, the engine roared to life without hesitation, as if it had been waiting. She pulled out of the lot, tires crunching over gravel, desperate to put Hollow's Edge behind her. The road ahead looked familiar, and she clung to the hope that if she just kept driving straight, she'd eventually reach a main highway, but after only a few minutes, her stomach sank. The crooked oak with the lightning-scorched trunk appeared on her right. Again. The same twisted branches, the same hollow at its base. She pressed harder on the accelerator, heart pounding, refusing to look in the rearview mirror, but curiosity won. The headlights were back, exactly the same distance behind her as before, floating perfectly level with the road. Lightning illuminated a road sign ahead. She squinted through the rain. Hollow's Edge, 3 miles. Her knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. Somehow, she was right back where she'd started. The cafe parking lot loomed again, but this time, the lot wasn't empty. The pale figure stood in the middle of it, arms at its sides, head tilted slightly. Behind it, just visible in the fog, were more figures, 5, maybe 6, all perfectly still, all with those blinding, circular eyes. Something clicked in Aisha's mind, a fragment of understanding she couldn't explain. They couldn't touch her while she was moving. That was why the lights never passed her, why they only lingered. But the moment she stopped, the moment she ran out of gas, they would come. And they would not come alone. Aisha's eyes locked on the glowing needle of her fuel gauge. It was dipping fast, faster than it should. She'd driven this car for years, and even in bad weather, she knew exactly how far a tank could take her. But now, it felt as if the fuel was draining in great invisible gulps, the engine hungrier than it had ever been. She gritted her teeth and pressed harder on the accelerator, trying to ignore the constant ache in her shoulders from gripping the wheel. The rain had changed again. It no longer spattered in random rhythms, it came in perfectly timed intervals, as if falling in sync with something unseen. Each drop that struck the windshield was heavier, darker, and when she looked closely, she thought she saw the faintest streaks of red spiraling down the glass before vanishing into the wipers. Ahead, the road twisted sharply, and something new emerged in the fog. A truck, old, rusted, and jackknifed across both lanes, sat blocking the way. Its headlights were out, its windshield shattered. Steam hissed from beneath the hood. Aisha's pulse surged. She slowed just enough to steer onto the narrow shoulder, tires slipping dangerously close to the ditch. As she passed, her peripheral vision caught movement inside the cab, a shape sitting in the driver's seat, perfectly still, with 2 glowing eyes staring straight ahead. Once back on the main stretch, she risked a glance in the mirror. The headlights were closer now, much closer. They didn't move like car lights, they seemed to glide through the fog, unaffected by distance or terrain. The memory of the truck driver's fixed stare burned in her mind, and a thought she didn't want crept in. Were they trying to slow her down, or hurt her? She pushed the car harder, engine groaning under the strain. Her speedometer needle climbed, but so did her anxiety. the gas gauge was now a hair above empty. She had minutes, maybe less. And as if sensing her desperation, the road ahead began to change again. Figures stood in the rain just beyond the next curve, shoulder to shoulder, blocking the way entirely. They didn't move. They didn't flinch. And each one's glowing eyes reflected off the wet asphalt like tiny, perfect moons. The line of figures ahead was unbroken, stretching from the dripping trees on one side of the road to the ditch on the other. Aisha's breath came in sharp bursts as her mind scrambled for options. She could try to swerve off-road, but the ground was nothing but mud and roots. One wrong move and she'd sink or flip the car. The fuel gauge was now so low the warning light glared at her like a countdown. She eased off the gas just enough to take the curve without skidding, but even that felt dangerous. The figures didn't react to her approach, they just stood there, their glowing eyes locked on her. Rain streamed down their pale faces without making them blink. The closer she got, the more she realized they weren't just blocking the road, they were leaning in, ever so slightly, as if waiting for her to cross an invisible line. The rule in her head, the one she hadn't been told but knew was true, screamed at her not to stop. But there was no gap. No way through. Her hands trembled on the wheel. She slowed. Slower. Slower still. The figures straightened. The headlights behind her brightened, flaring so white they flooded her rearview mirror with blinding light. The car rolled to a full stop. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the figures stepped forward in perfect unison, their feet making no sound against the soaked asphalt. The first one reached her driver's side door, close enough for her to see droplets of rain hanging from the tips of its fingers without falling. Its eyes tilted downward, meeting hers through the glass. It smiled, not wide, not human, but just enough to stretch the skin around its mouth unnaturally. From behind, the blinding glow swelled, and she realized with a cold clarity, the lights were no longer just following. They were here. The smile on the figure's face didn't fade. It just stayed there, stretched and wrong, as if it had been drawn onto skin that wasn't built for it. Another figure moved in from the front of the car, its glowing eyes cutting through the rain like lanterns underwater. More followed, their steps silent, their pale feet leaving no ripples in the shallow puddles. Aisha's chest tightened until she could barely breathe. She slammed her foot on the gas out of pure instinct, but the engine didn't respond. It idled, purring steadily, as though mocking her. The dashboard lights flickered once and went dark, leaving her in total shadow except for the harsh white glow of their eyes pressing in from every angle. The figure at her window lifted its hand and placed it against the glass. The skin was so pale it looked almost translucent, the faint suggestion of veins visible beneath the surface. The rain should have been running down its arm, but it didn't. The drops clung there instead, motionless, as if time itself had stuttered. Aisha tried to look away, but her gaze kept dragging back to those perfect, round eyes, and the faint, spiraling movement within them, like something pulling her in. With a sudden crack, the headlights from behind flared so brightly the entire car was bathed in pure white. She squeezed her eyes shut, gripping the steering wheel as if it could anchor her. A deep, low hum began to rise in the air, not from the car, not from the figures, but from the road beneath her, as if the ground itself was alive. When she opened her eyes, her stomach lurched. She was still sitting in the driver's seat, but the car was moving, rolling forward down a different stretch of road she didn't recognize. The figures were gone. The rain had stopped. And ahead, in the distance, the crooked oak waited for her again, except now, she could see shapes moving in its hollow. The road unspooled before her like a black ribbon under a sky that had forgotten the storm. The silence was almost worse than the rain, no engine noise, no wind, not even the faint hiss of tires on pavement. The car simply moved forward, as though the decision was no longer hers to make. The crooked oak loomed ahead, its twisted branches arching toward her like skeletal arms. As she drew closer, the hollow at its base became clearer. It wasn't just a dark gap in the wood, it was deep, impossibly so, like a tunnel into something far larger than the tree itself. A faint white light pulsed from within, spilling over the wet grass. Shapes moved inside, shifting and coiling in ways that didn't belong to anything human. She realized with a sick twist in her gut that the light wasn't illuminating them, it was coming from them. The car rolled to a stop on its own, only a few feet from the hollow. Her fingers clutched the steering wheel, but the leather felt softer, warmer, as though it were slowly molding to her hands. The air outside shimmered faintly, and from the hollow, one of the glowing shapes began to emerge. It was smaller than the figures she'd seen before, hunched and crawling, its limbs too many to count at first glance. Each movement was jerky, as though it were mimicking something it had only partially learned. When its head lifted toward her, she saw the eyes, not the perfect, smooth circles she had come to dread, but jagged, broken orbs of light, flickering in and out like a dying bulb. For a brief, disorienting moment, she thought she saw her own reflection inside them, distorted and bent. A whisper brushed the inside of her head, not through her ears but directly in her mind. "You've been here before." Her chest tightened, her pulse hammering in her throat. She knew the whisper was telling the truth. The crooked oak wasn't the beginning of the road. It was the center. Everything she'd driven through, every loop, every figure, was orbiting around it. And if she stayed here any longer, she wouldn't just be a visitor to Hollow's edge. She'd become part of it. The smaller figure crept closer, its limbs scraping lightly against the wet ground. The light in its eyes flared and dimmed in uneven bursts, like it was struggling to stay awake. Aisha's chest ached under the weight of the whisper still curling in her mind. "You've been here before." She couldn't remember when, or if, it had really happened, but a cold certainty told her it wasn't just a trick. Behind the oak, the forest began to move. Not with wind, but with shapes, tall, still silhouettes, their eyes blooming into existence one by one, until dozens glowed in the shadows. They didn't advance yet. They just waited, forming a silent audience around the tree. The car's interior felt smaller, the roof pressing lower, the air thickening. The wheel was warm now, too warm, and when she looked down, she saw faint white light seeping between her fingers where they touched the leather. The smaller figure reached her door and lifted its head fully. Its flickering eyes locked on hers, and for the first time, Aisha saw a faint expression there, not hunger, not malice, but recognition. It tilted its head toward the hollow, and in that moment she understood. Leaving meant becoming like the figures. Staying meant becoming part of the road. There was no third choice. She yanked the door open and stepped into the wet grass. The figures in the forest didn't move, but their eyes brightened, and the low hum returned, rumbling up through the ground. She walked toward the hollow, her pulse thrumming in her ears, the smaller figure shuffling beside her like a strange escort. The light from inside the oak spilled over her feet, climbing her legs, her chest, her face, until everything was blinding white. Somewhere, far away, a car engine roared to life. On a rain-slick highway with no name, two steady headlights appeared in the rearview mirror of a stranger's car. They would drive for miles, maybe hours, before realizing the road had no end. And in that steady glow behind them, if they looked closely, they might see the faint outline of a driver they'd never met, with eyes like two perfect, white circles.